Well, we'll see how this goes. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Sanctus Forum. I am Michael Stewart Robb, better known as Mike, and this is Conspiracy Conversations. We talk about Dallas Willard's The Divine Conspiracy, section by section, and we have a guest today. Our guest is Mary Poplin, who I'll introduce in a second, but just to let you know, this is going to run for, I don't know, somewhere around an hour or something like that. So if you don't want to just sit and watch, there's a podcast associated with this. I think you have to look for Sanctus Forum, or you can go to our website, sanctus.institute, and you can find the links to the podcast there and have an audio-only experience. While you're there at the website, do sign up for our almost monthly newsletter, and then you can find out about what Sanctus is doing otherwise. And subscribing to this YouTube channel, if you're watching this on YouTube, or subscribing to the podcast, also helps us keep in touch with you. But that newsletter is the best. Yeah, so I'm not quite sure how this is going to go because I am not exactly a liberal Christian and not exactly somebody on the Christian left. Although I might be wrong. One of the things about this is there's kind of spectrums here, and you can kind of look to your left and look to your right. This is my right. That's my left. Yeah, okay, I got it in the right direction. And you'll see people there, and they will think that you are either right or left, depending on where they stand. So can be a little confusing. And but we want to try to get some clarity on that, and I have invited a guest who's going to help us with that. Mary Poplin is a longtime professor at Claremont Consortium, which are a bunch of different colleges in California. She taught education there for years, and she's also the author of Finding Calcutta, which is about Mother Teresa. And if you're too young, you might actually not know who she is, or maybe you do. Hopefully you do. Google her, which is funny to say that you should have to Google Mother Teresa, but Google her. She was the Sisters of Charity did a lot of good work for Jesus in Calcutta. And Mary is also the author of a book called Is Reality Secular? And she has recently retired from Claremont in order to return to her native state of Texas, where she's hoping to write some more, and so I guess some is already being written. Well, anyway, hello, Mary.
Hello.
Welcome.
Good to see you. Thank you.
Good to see you. Well, should we just tell them?
I don't. It's your podcast.
I messed up. This is the second time that we're doing this. I forgot to push record on the camera. So, yeah, there you go. I could act like I haven't been talking to you for half an hour. Mary.
Yes.
You are working on some new book or something. Can you share a little bit about what you're thinking about?
Well, I'm looking at particular issues that are sort of hot today, like the left versus the right, for example. That's the one I'll use here. And what that would look like. What does the Bible say about that? So if you really look up all the times the Bible's talking about the left and the right, it always says, do not turn either to your left or your right. Even those cows that are taking the goods back to the Israelites, the Ark of the Covenant, no one's guiding them, but they evidently turn neither to the left or right. So the left and the right are not biblical principles.
Interesting.
They're recognized in the Bible, but they're not recognized as something we ought to be doing.
Yeah,
So that's
yeah.
one of them. Yeah. So
Well, that sounds perfect for what we want to talk about today. And if I haven't said it already, the section that we're going to talk about is here, chapter 2. It's called The Gospel on the Left. Everybody has a different edition, but mine starts on page 50. And the first section here is the gospel as entirely social. What did you think of this section? I know you read it yesterday, and as we usually do, but what did you think of this when you read it again for preparation to talk with me?
well, I think I concentrated on really probably what he was doing at first, and that is what he's saying is we have reduced the entire gospel to love. I mean, you can jump in here and say, but I mean, that's what the last reading, that's what I would say. He says that we have reduced the gospel to love. And the problem with that is we don't know what love is. So we've also morphed the concept of love. And it no longer, he says it doesn't, because we've morphed it and we've sort of given it a personal touch, like whatever, love is to you versus love to me, right?
Right.
Then it's no longer that we can actually believe that we're loving and not connect it to our individual lives. We can do it as like a concept or something. And so it doesn't really affect our relationship with our neighbors. It's not connected. And this is probably his big point. It's not connected to a life transformation.
Yeah.
To a transformation to a life abundant because of the way we've separated it from God. And once you separate it from God, you've got a humanistic principle that doesn't have necessarily any guidelines. So, what used to be the norm would be that you would have men and women who would fall in love and get married, right? And stay married.
Okay.
And now people may not even get married, but they still believe that they're in love, right? Or they're not necessarily just in love, but they're following love. So it has a concept, but the concept's very abstract in terms of the way we live our lives.
Right.
Now.
It's a bit of a free-for-all with respect to what love means, the central principle, which Dallas would connect to the disappearance of moral knowledge, as he called it. That nobody's even looking for a unifying principle of love that might exist apart from us, what we think about it. Nobody is all that worried or thinks they don't even know that it exists, so they're not looking for it. So as far as what love is for me, or for our church, let's keep it in Christian terms, can be different from what it is for another church or for other people.
And I saw an instant when Dallas was speaking one time when the word was not love, it was truth. So he had been speaking for a number of minutes and had opened for questions. And this young co-ed goes to the microphone and says, in a pretty disgusting manner, she said, "Truth, truth, truth. You just keep talking about truth. What is truth?" Well, Dallas, who always took everything very seriously, right? People's questions seriously. He stood at the podium for a moment and he kind of looked down. And then he looked up and he said very calmly, "Truth is reality. And reality is what you run into when you're wrong."
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, everybody was just silent. We were just, it's one of those moments when you just gasp that somebody has said something so true that you've got to think about it.
There is for you, Mary, and for everybody watching, listening, there is a little talk, about an hour long. I think Dallas speaking at UCLA on truth. It's just called Truth. Mm-hmm. And he comes at it in this very typical way that typical for him, and that he can take sort of very serious philosophical issues and just present them to a college audience. So basically not his colleagues, but he's teaching. Right. And he's teaching to people who want to know how to deal with their lives and to deal with their world. It's a really good talk, and if I get to it, I will try to put that in the description for the video here so people can see that. Right. But when you get into this sort of question of morals and the moral of love, there is this question of, well, what is true love? Right. And there I do wonder if it is for Christians who are on the left, a total free-for-all, because one thing you will always see is they are very concerned about structural evils and getting rid of them. So they're concerned about things like slavery. Right. And so you could imagine a definition of love which said, love is being committed to removing structural evils such as slavery from the world. And then, the list goes on of other sorts of structural evils that some of these people who they're very serious about committing their life to that. It's true. Yeah. Right. Is there somebody there who you really respect, who is working in that area of trying to get rid of structural evils, or somebody that you've met, Christian, not Christian? Well, I mean, I'm sure I have, but I haven't really thought about it recently. But I mean, there are groups that are working, whole groups that are working against slavery, right? And the groups right now working with people in the Ukraine, or, there's always groups that are concerned about that, I think. Yeah. In every city, you've got people that people know care about social justice, for example. Yeah. They care about it. And and there are churches that care about, you kind of say, well, that church cares about this, and worries about that. So I think there's always, I think probably every single person has some issues that really they feel called to address in one way or another. Yeah. Either by not participating in it, or by working actively against it. Yeah, yeah. Well, you taught in education, right? And I assume you're teaching people to go and work in public schools as teachers. I was mostly working with PhD students who were already in the public schools. Okay. But they were interested in social change, largely. And they were interested in the fact that children of the poor don't come out of school with the same knowledge that children who are middle class come out with. They don't have the same teachers. They don't have the same buildings. So people who see that, I've known that a lot. I personally did with a group of great graduate students, 3-year study of 77 highly effective teachers in the most underperforming schools in Los Angeles. So they were the stars in school. They didn't act like it or anything like that, but all we did was to get
the superintendents to allow us access to the achievement data. And you would see the achievement data was really sad. Most kids went through school most of the time, and they barely ever raised their achievement level. And then you'd see this one teacher where a child would get in their class and they might make 4 years progress in 1 year. So, then you've got a little anomaly to study, right? So then we studied, what does a highly effective teacher look like?
Okay, well, now you've got me hooked here. So give me at least one insight.
Okay, there's several. Number one, I'll give you the big one is they are both strongly encouraging the students and strongly unwilling to take any buff off them. Okay. There's not going to be any silliness going on in their classroom. I mean, somebody might say something silly and they'd all, the teacher would laugh and things like that. I don't mean they were just stoic like that. But you were not going to mess up the classroom. You just weren't going to act out in a way that was going to be disruptive. And the other thing is they were very individually with students. They knew the students very well, and they were almost always taking students, either being with them at lunch or being with them after school, students that they could see were in trouble. I'm not talking about academic trouble, but they could just see there was something troubling them. And so they would have conversations with them, encourage them. And that it was very nice to see. And interestingly, even though they were very tough academically, they really pushed kids to work very hard. They constantly told them they could do it. And if they were having trouble doing it, raise their hand and they'd be right there. And they were right there. The other sort of interesting observation, which relates to what I just said, is they never sat down at their desk. If there was a class in their room, they were always walking around the room, row by row. And so, it gave the students the knowledge, number one, you're never going to get away with anything here. Number two, you're always going to have help. If you're working on something and you're stuck, the teacher's right there. Yeah. And they're gonna see your face, that you're having trouble, and they're gonna walk over there and help you, or they're gonna respond to your asking them to. Yeah. I physically, it's a really tiring position, right? Yeah, right. And they set some rules, pretty tough rules. So I remember this one guy who started the class. He was an African-American teacher in the high school. And he said, let me just get something straight. This is the first day of class, right? Let me just get something straight. This is my room. I own everything. That door is my door. This door is my door. Those windows, they're my windows. And if you want to mess up with them, you need to go through me. Yeah. So, well, that's they were funny. That's wonderful to hear. People in those situations, in those schools, doing a good job. Great job, in rough places. I mean, they didn't have a lot of equipment. They didn't have a lot of stuff going on. Wasn't necessarily a nice building. Well, let's talk now a bit about, let's depress ourselves a little bit and, in the field of education, staying there, what is something that's really not working well that somebody who's concerned about structural evils, somebody who might be, say, Christian on the left could think, we got to take this on? Well, I think it's the thing that I started with, that there are schools in the poorer communities that whose students consistently underperform. Yeah. And part of that is that the best teachers end up being placed in the best schools. Okay. That the best economic schools. So that's parts of the city that are economically sound. And I think that's one of the things, because, you know, I think the poor are less likely to contest what's going on, maybe less likely to know what should be going on. And so you want to kind of cover your bases in the, you know, around the population that does. But in a way, it should be the reverse.
Okay.
The other thing that really needs to happen is teacher education is not doing a good job right now of teaching people how to teach.
Okay.
You know, they're doing a lot of the things that you hear about a lot today, socio-emotional learning.
Okay.
There's no evidence that socio-emotional learning has helped anybody. And that's the other thing. There's this disconnect between research and what's actually going on. And the other thing is the other thing that teachers are being trained in are the race issues. Well, the race issues are important, but they are not the teaching of reading. They're not the teaching of spelling. They're not the teaching of mathematics. You know, if you don't know how to teach mathematics and you don't know how to teach geography or whatever you're supposed to teach, then just knowing that there's these inequities are not going to necessarily help you. Inequities.
Yeah. Well, if there was one policy change that you could make, we make you educational dictator in America for a day. What would you change?
I would make teacher education, well, two. I'd make teacher education more rigorous.
I don't know if the second one's going to count now. I just said one. All right.
I know, but
give it to us.
I already said the second one. You got to get great teachers in the schools with the students who are going to have the most trouble, or have the least background. They may not even have trouble. They just don't have the background to do what you're asking them to do.
Yeah.
So sorry, it was two. I admit
it's
it.
all right. It's all right. Do you know Tony Campolo? Do you know
just vaguely, yeah.
Vaguely, okay. He taught at Eastern College. It's a school over in Pennsylvania. He came to my school when I don't know, I was a junior or a senior, and he spoke on education, and he told a story about first he told a story about a school that grabbed students and did an incredible job with them with very, very little money, and it was in a basement, and it was just nothing special whatsoever, and they just invested in the kids, and they did a really good job. He told a story about a teacher who landed one of these really great jobs at a school where it was unlikely that they would get the job, and you know, students all are sure to go to college, and one of these kind of schools there. And he said that his reaction to that was, what a waste. And he felt like this teacher, who is a very brilliant person to begin with, should have taken that ability that they had to teach and gone to work with people where they could really, I guess sounds cliche, but really make a difference.
Right.
And I remember that now still. I really quite remember that moment of him coming and speaking to us about that and saying, you know, just use the abilities that you've been given, your intelligence, you did well at school or whatever, and take it and invest it somewhere where people don't have the ability to get those sorts of things. Right.
It was a whole network of schools, and I think they probably still exist. It was they're called the Kipp Schools, and they did precisely that. They took great teachers and put them into these schools, and the classrooms were very small, but the kids were from impoverished neighborhoods, and I'm trying to think of what Kipp stood for. maybe it'll come to me later, but they were a network all over, and they still are. I know that there's a whole Kipp Academy in Dallas still. I think they're all over the world, but all over the country rather. But they precisely did that. They tried to take the best teachers and put them into these schools that were not they're not public schools though.
Yeah.
So, and they have very few. They don't have a lot of middle management. So, but that's pretty interesting.
Well,
knowledge is power. That's what it was.
Knowledge is power.
Kipp.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Kipp. Right. Knowledge is power. Yeah. Well, getting back to Dallas's section here, we're talking about gospels. The gospel on the left, but the gospel, well, where the left has been has sort of shifted over the years. And even today, I think there's even a bit of a datedness here to his book. He uses John A.T. Robinson as an example, for me, page 52, of a Christian who sort of typifies being on the left. And I actually own a couple of his books. I've already showed these to you, Mary, here.
Right.
This one here, Honest to God. Now, I mean, I wasn't around when this was published, but when it was, every Christian who was going to church read this book, even if they knew that they weren't going to like it, because it was so it was provocative, and
sure.
I mean, he does in the end profess some belief in God, but a lot of the honest to God bits are being honest about how serious naturalism and humanism are for us now, and sort of science has moved on, and in a sense he's trying to scrape together some bits from his Christian heritage to make the church meaningful.
Right.
Now, I mean, he's kind of, like I said, this is the 1960s here, and Dallas read this book as well, and it was a big deal, and then there were a lot of responses to it. It's connected to, maybe you know this one, Mary, The Secular City by Harvey Cox. Mm-hmm. There's a very similar, he was at Harvard. These are very similar type thinkers. But even that is a bit dated in terms of where the left is.
Right.
And I've got even some older sort of visual aids here. See, this is my teacher, ness there, visual aid. So I didn't grab my Schleiermacher books. They're back there. Friedrich, I'll say it with an English accent. Friedrich Schleiermacher is generally thought to be the father of liberal theology. So early 19th century, and German, taught at the University of Berlin at the same time as Hegel did. Hegel and Schleiermacher didn't like each other. But he was very inspiring for a kind of an elite. So most German churches wouldn't have known anything about that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. And liberal theology was mainly kind of an elite sort of thing that professors talked about, and it gradually sort of left Germany. I've got here, this is more end of the 19th, early 20th century, Ernst Troeltsch, I'm trying to say them with an English accent, Albrecht Ritschl, and Adolf von Harnack. These are kind of your trio of liberal German theologians.
Okay.
Right?
I think so. I mean, I read about the early ones, the Bultmann.
Yeah.
Where Bultmann went off, and I read a lot about Bultmann and Linnemann. Linnemann had been one of his students who saw that he was going off and tried to you
Well,
know.
Bultmann is he's contemporary with Karl Barth.
Yeah,
is
right.
that so? They're 20th century people, and
Yeah,
the
they're
interesting
later.
thing, and I was going to get to them here, is that these guys here, all I think I'm not sure when they died, but they all ran up against the wall of World War I and World War II.
All right.
So if you read these guys, they're all very hopeful about the world. They think the world's going to become a better and better place. They're very hopeful about the humanist project, the way in which Christianity can transform society. They also think of culture as German culture or European culture as pretty much symbiotic with the church and growing up together. And then all of a sudden you have these world wars, and that hopefulness kind of drains out of
Right.
them. And what you get instead is what kind of rises from the ashes. And Dallas talks about this a little bit in the very first page there of our section, is a focus on liberation and oppression and sort of structural evils,
Right.
which these old guys wouldn't have really thought much about. And but people like John Robinson would have started to care more and more about. And this is now where we can kind of maybe merge into your story a little bit of you didn't spend your whole life in the church, did you?
No. No, I didn't.
You grew up in the church, but in a sense that at some point was no longer leading important thing for you. Is that right?
Right. I mean, I grew up in a church, really, to be honest, that wasn't really preaching the gospel.
Okay.
Okay. It was preaching the social gospel. So
Okay.
it had already changed.
Well,
So it was a major denomination. And I think that where Dallas kind of pinpoints this is that you can, how he talks about it's not always, I think he's talking about love here. It's not necessarily connected to individual people's lives or their neighborhood. It's not connected to their life, really. It's not transforming, I think it might be even the word that he uses. It's more like sin management versus transformation of an individual.
Right. And the sins, and this is very important, the sins are social sins. They're things that the system is doing and not necessarily things that I'm doing.
Right. And even the things that you're doing more from being, just seen as wrong in the society to just seeing it as as a choice you have, right?
Sure.
Whether or not you, have sexual relationships with many people, or just over and over, or you never get married, but you have children. I mean, those things are all, they're no longer considered the sin that they would be considered before.
And that was a major issue for the Christians on the left from the 1960s. I mean, I want to find the quote here in Dallas. It's not a very big thing, but actually, he doesn't have as much of it as I thought. He talks here on page 50 for me. He talks about how participation in the struggle of Black Americans then kind of moved into issues for the war on Vietnam. And then he says later came issues of gender, sexual preference, ecology, speciesism, and generalized correctness. What I was looking for, and I didn't find it there, was the sexual revolution.
Right.
Which was with, well, all Western countries, really, from the 50s, 60s, 70s, and on. And this is something that many churches on the left really got behind.
Right.
And wanted to change the mores of sexuality. Right.
Yes. And to be more open to divorce and,
Yep.
relationships without any kind of commitment and things like that. Yes.
Yep.
They did.
Having been a professor at, you always refer to it as a secular university, but you meet a lot of people, maybe in the church or not in the church, who are left-leaning. What do you think is? We mentioned love, but what do you think is really motivating them? What are they really after?
They're after what they believe would be good, and that is that the society would have fewer rules and people would be able to fulfill their lives the way they personally decide to do that.
Okay.
And I think that the biggest loss in that view is that living that way has consequences they don't admit. Do you know what I mean? There are consequences that that people will experience that they're not warned about.
Yeah. Well, here I'll give you the pulpit for a moment. I mean, warn us about them. I mean, what sort of suffering or misery should we be worried about?
Should they be worried about, or should we be worried about the
what
culture?
kind of consequences? I mean, maybe it's not personal, maybe it's other kinds of consequences, but what?
Well, let's see. Being really open sexually will give you diseases. You want to be really a little hard-nosed there. It gets you to a place where I believe because there's no, let's see, how can I say this? There's no hard and fast boundaries, so everything can move. So for example, when I first started, I grew up in a conservative home, but when I first started experimenting with life, right, I would move a little more to the left and I would say to myself, oh, it's okay, everybody else is doing it, right?
Yeah.
And so then you move a little more to the left, and I'm using the left as the way I went. And you're saying the same thing. I'm everybody else is doing it, and at least I'm not like the people over there. Okay. Pretty soon you are the people over there. You're with them, and now you're saying the same thing about the people further over, right? Even though, this is the consequence that they're experiencing, but I'm not that far over, right? Yeah. So it's a sneaky thing. It's like, I don't know, watching pornography, right? So, it's just once, or it's just, it's not so bad. And then the next time it's worse and worse and worse. And you're pretty soon addicted to that, or alcohol or anything. So, the enemy of our souls has a lot of great tricks. And if you don't have a kind of permanent moral plumb line that is agreed upon by other people in the society, even if it's not very many people in the society, then your shifting has no boundaries. Well, and I think that's what happens, and certainly happened to me. You first go into like secular humanism, and you start renaming sins as moderate sins, and then they're not sins at all, and then it's just as good as anything else. Children born out of wedlock, living together with two people without any real commitment. And then you go into something even more specific about liberal theology, where you're supposed to be spiritual but not religious, right?
Okay.
That's a very big thing these days.
Okay,
I'm
so
spiritual, but I'm not religious, right?
I don't think I've ever said that, and
Yeah, you
so
probably
unpack that for us a little bit. Like, what?
It means I don't really have any permanent rules, but I'm basically a good person. So
Okay.
I'm spiritual because I'm a good person, right?
Okay.
Spiritual equals good in that.
Okay.
And the focus is, it's sort of a result of postmodernism. So I went from being like a feminist, a kind of probably conservative feminist, which the early feminist movement wasn't radical at all. But then I just followed along with it. It's really part of postmodernism. There's no definition anymore,
Yeah.
Definitions are always shifting.
Right.
So that's what happened to the mainline denominations.
Okay.
They just began accepting this sin after that sin, and just if not accepting them, at least not talking about it. And they just went further and further left until what's left of them in the United States are a lot of very beautiful buildings that were built hundreds of years ago, and they're still gorgeous, but there's nobody in them.
Yeah.
And then you go to something that looks like could have been a dance hall yesterday. It's got all these chairs in it, and it's there's an on-fire preacher up there, right?
Yeah.
So
well, I have seen some churches on the left which aren't anywhere close to selling their building and having it torn down or anything like that. They do have people that are there and want to be there and give their money and give their time and are interested in learning more about that expression of faith. And so help us. Let's try to figure out what.
So they're just as vibrant as they were before. They have as many.
Well, I'm not. I guess I'm not talking about the history there. I just know that there exist churches on the left that aren't prepared to collapse, but do actually still have people in them, and young people too, and old people, and that. But what tends to? How would you recognize a church or a Christian's on the left? Like, what sorts of markers would you sort of look for if you walked into a church and said, wonder what kind of church this is, and then you see this happening or that happening? What are some things you could look out for just to help us get a sense of what it means to be on the left? You're welcome to use Dallas as a crutch here. This is no problem.
Oh, Dallas could do it better than I. You would hear sermons that made everybody feel good.
Okay.
And that didn't concentrate much on sin.
Okay.
And or maybe even at all. We would hear a lot of those. You would have very well-dressed people in general.
Okay.
I don't think there are many of those churches where people who are lower class or middle class, even low middle class, would actually be attending. It's usually slightly more like a social club. And the people are nice. They're going to be nice and they're going to be friendly. But Christ is not going to be the center of the sermons. A lot of it will be about social issues. Yeah. So
that doesn't always make me feel good. Social issues. Somebody is pointing out my injustices, ways in which I'm ruining the planet, or ruining other people's lives that live across the world or in some other
Yeah.
part of the city. Right? That's not necessarily feel good stuff.
Yeah, I don't think that that's going to be the dominant message that you get.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
I mean,
know,
if you okay, so you go into those churches, and we all know that poverty is an issue, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So they
right.
have a fund. They'll have a fund for people who are poor, or people that they hear, people of even their own members who have had really bad experiences all of a sudden and have lost things, and there will be a section, a part of that church that donates to the poor, that fills bags for the poor in India, food, and things like that.
Yeah.
But it's not about the transformation of yourself.
No. No.
Not about the transformation of yourself.
No.
It's not about the sins we have, right?
It's not about the sins we have. And that's really what Dallas is after here when he's trying to criticize the gospel on the left, or people that teach it. He's saying that you can focus on social issues. You can give people a nice place to come to where they feel loved and accepted. You can have wonderful music and a wonderful church building, and you can still have people who go there for 30 years of their life, and they don't come out looking any more like Jesus than they did when they went in.
Right.
And that's what he wants to say. Why should that be the case? And but I think, and tell me if you think I'm on the right track with this. The issue is not whether you're concerned about social issues or not. I mean, I know that you're concerned about many social issues, education being one of them, but it's not as if you just walk into one church and you see that they're interested in social issues and you think, well, that must be a liberal leftist church.
Oh, no.
But what is the thing is these social issues have moved to the center of what that church is doing and is about.
The center of the liberal church?
Yes, that
I would say that's not the center of it. That's
okay.
That's what they do in compensation for what the center is.
Ooh, okay. That there was a lot of heat on that statement, but I think I'm kind of parroting Dallas here a little bit with. And maybe he's being extra generous, but go a little slower for us. Well, I mean, Dallas
says, it's not necessarily connected to the individual lives, right?
Yeah.
He says it doesn't really affect their relationship with their neighbor.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's not really connected to a serious life and transformation.
Yeah.
What he calls life in abundance.
Let me read there what he says, so we actually have that
good.
Kind of on the record. He says, the current Gospels, left and right, exhibit the very same type of conceptual disconnection from and practical irrelevance to the personal integrity of believers. And certainly so, if we put that integrity in terms of biblically specific Christ-likeness.
Right.
And both lack any essential bearing upon the individual's life as a whole, especially upon occupations or work time, and upon the fine texture of our personal relationships in the home and neighborhood. right?
Right.
So I guess it seems to me that he wants to say something like, you want to see the world change, then going about it in kind of these high level theoretical ways isn't going to work. What will work is entering into a relationship with Jesus in which he transforms your character
Right.
and soul.
Right.
And then
In
you
which
might
he's-
be in a place to help somebody else.
Right. Right. I mean, I think in the churches, I mean, I'm not saying this is really bad, because this is the good, it's a good thing that they do. I think these churches do have programs that that help the poor, or whatever the issue is, right? They do have them. I'm not sure that they spend a large amount of their money on them, but they have them. They still have them. Trying to think of a study I saw. I don't think I can call it up well enough right now, but it was a study that the wealthier people don't necessarily do more than the poor in the churches.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, I'm in a position to see a number of people who give, both people who give to me and who give and support churches and other things. And I see incredible amounts of giving from people who you would think don't have a lot.
right. That's true.
And I will also see, sometimes I see the numbers and I see how somebody who has a lot of means will give the same amount as what somebody who has a lot fewer means gives.
Right.
They give it all at once usually, but that person who has less usually just kind of gives step by
Right.
step.
Plods along. Right. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's true.
And so there's a lot. Where that comes from is that those people of, few means have been transformed by Jesus, and they trust him enough to just let their money go.
It's like the woman in the gospel who puts her last 2 pennies in the offering plate, and Jesus said she gave more than anybody else.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, Mara, we haven't heard how you actually got to know Dallas. This isn't Dallas. I always pull up the books here as if there's the people. But how did that come about?
Okay, so I was a new Christian at a university, and I think it was a person probably from like Campus Crusade or something, who said, "You need to."
Let me get this right. This isn't your student days, right?
Yeah.
So
No.
new Christian at the university.
New Christian at the university. I've been a professor for over 20 years. I'm now tenured.
Yeah.
I'm not a Christian, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so someone came to me. I think once you're a Christian in a university, somehow it gets around to people who would help you, I guess, and they would help you. And so I had never seen an academic, really a serious Christian academic, speak. And they suggested I go and see Dallas Willard, and he was doing either a 1 or 2 day workshop where he was speaking several times. And I went up and introduced myself, or somebody introduced me, I think, really. And he was very, very kind. But I always noticed that he had these amazing insights. And I remember when I first came to Christ and was first introduced to him, he treated me more, it was more like a father, which is what I really needed anyway. I needed to see, I needed somebody who could lead me, who knew where I was supposed to go, who was in academia, who was, really very well, knew Christ very well.
I guess he's he's probably 20 years older than you or something like that.
Yeah, he's probably 20 years older than me.
Yeah.
Probably. Yeah. So then I just began to follow him around, follow where I knew he was going to speak. And he was always there. I think that he did that he could talk to anyone. So being an atheist didn't bother him at all. That I had been an atheist didn't bother him. But he was very kind. And then I began to really study some of his work. I mean, he's just so brilliant.
Yeah.
He writes totally as a philosopher, which is hard for me because that's, social scientists are not really philosophers. But I went to hear him speak many, many times, and I was really grateful.
I think one of the advantages he had was he spent his time in philosophy classrooms. So not only are you reading, major, Plato or Kant or 20th century philosophy, but then you're working with students all the time, right?
Right, but his other advantage was he had been a farmer.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think that's an unusual combination for a person of his intellect to also have that kind of grounding. But he didn't even want to go to college. Somebody found him and said, you need to go to college, right?
Yeah.
I think in his story.
His brother encouraged him to go. But there was also, he came from a family where there wasn't just money around to go to college. And there weren't elaborate federal loan systems and all of that. I mean, going to college was a serious endeavor. It's like buying a house.
Right.
And so he kind of managed to go. I mean, he went to, in a sense, the cheap school that was in his kind of tradition. And, I guess he didn't stay at the cheap schools. USC isn't a cheap school.
That one doesn't qualify.
Yeah.
No college qualifies these days.
Yeah.
It's very expensive to go to college.
Yeah. Well, he was so what I hear you saying, and what the word I have for it is winsome. Right? So somebody comes at him with a kind of a hostile question.
Right.
And or maybe a genuine sort of question, but he just had ways of opening people's minds to sort of look at it in a way. And he tried to do it as gently as possible.
Right.
But
he he took everything seriously. He didn't, he took a person seriously, even if they were, a little kid like me.
Yeah.
Who didn't know anything.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you so much,
Thank you,
Mary,
Thank
for
you.
this.
Great to see you.
And hopefully we can piece this together for something that's actually helpful for everybody. But thanks for being here. And
thank you.
To all of you, thank you for watching and listening. And if you want to know more about Sanctus Institute, well, probably you should check out some of our other videos and some of the other things in this series of conversations with guests. There's also this website that I've mentioned, sanctus.institute, where you can sign up for a newsletter. Woohoo! But behind Sanctus is just an interest in helping Europeans find a Christ-empowered spirituality. And if you're watching this far, you're probably interested in that as well. So thanks for being here. Bye.
Okay.
All right.
Now we're exhausted.
Now we are exhausted, yes.
I don't know how that last one came out, but you can probably piece it all together.